Hello everyone to another webinar from Rancor, today with Jussi about securing Office 365 and Microsoft Azure like a rockstar. My name is Matthias Einig, I'm MVP and CEO at Rancor, and I want to let Jussi introduce himself. Jussi?
Hello everyone, glad to be here. My name is Jussi Roine. I'm based in Helsinki, Finland. I'm the CTO at a company called OnSite, and I'm a Microsoft MVP as well as a Microsoft Regional Director. And back in the day, I also did the Microsoft Certified Master certification when it was still available.
Thank you, Jussi. Just for everyone to know that how this is working in this webinar, so we will record the entire webinar. Jussi, if you could please forward to the next slide. We will record the webinar and you will be able to receive the recording afterwards. So we will send out an email to everyone who signed up with a link to the webinar recording. If you have any questions during the webinar, then you can use the Q&A functionality in Zoom. So there should be a button where you can open up this Q&A window. You write your question, and then at the end, we have a dedicated 10 minutes of the webinar where we will pick up some of those questions and answer them live in the webinar. And the rest of the questions we will review afterwards and put into a blog post with the answers where we have them. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Jussi, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, Matthias. So let's get right to business. The agenda for the next 50 minutes or so, we'll start going first by going through the security building blocks. The big picture first, so that everybody understands what is available, what can I do, what I maybe shouldn't be doing. And at the heart of the security building blocks for both Office 365 as well as Microsoft Azure is Azure Active Directory, AAD. So we'll spend a bit of time in there to understand the capabilities and how it fits together with the big picture. Then we'll move beyond the basics and to all of the acronyms like ASM, OMS, PIM, TI, CAS, ASC, and so on. So we'll go through the separate security offerings, what kind of license they'll require, what's available, and what can you do with all these. Typically, when I meet with customers, they might ask me that, so we need to move to a public cloud like Azure and Office 365. Is it secure? And 2 years ago, I would say, yes, it's secure, and you got this and this. Just enable those and you're good to go. Today, when I get the same question, I say, yes, it's secure. You've got about 10 to 15 services depending on your needs and requirements. So let's spend a bit of time going through them so that you'll understand which one should you use and when, because there's a bit of overlap between the different security tools and services. Alrighty, so I am based in Helsinki, Finland, and for those of you who are not from the Nordics, this is the picture that we often use to tell to people outside Finland why they should visit Finland. So this is actually a picture from Lapland, and it looks like what Lapland would probably look for people who have never been to Lapland. So I often like to start with this one to entice people to visit Finland. And then when they ask, so how is Finland really? I live in the capital area, so that's about 1,000 kilometers south from Lapland. So this is more or less the thing that we have today in Finland. We do have snow, and normally we don't have snow in April, but we got snow yesterday. So we're quite used to snow, but we hate snow, and we would just like to have an eternal summer. So this year we're anticipating that summer will happen between August 5th and August 6th, but so far it's looking like we'll get snow until June, so summer might just be skipped this year. We'll see. So just to understand the Finnish mentality that we hate snow, but we have snow. So first off, the Office 365 core services. I know many of you probably know these by heart already. So at the top, we have Exchange Online for calendars and emails and whatnot. On the left-hand side, SharePoint Online for collaboration, team sites. On the right-hand side, Skype for Business for instant messaging and voice over IP calls. And at the bottom, Office 2016 clients that you would deploy, or Office Online that you would use on the browser. So this more or less forms the core functionality of Office 365. And it's been like this since 2011, really. If we expand this a bit and add all the major services, we can see that we've got Microsoft Teams, which is fairly new, as well as Planner, part of Office 365 Groups, which is kind of like a service, but more or less is a brand for a multiple set of services in Office 365. Then we have Yammer and Project, as well as OneDrive for Business. OneDrive for Business is fairly close to SharePoint Online. And then on the right-hand side, Office 365 Video, which is still driven through SharePoint Online, and sway.com for presentations you would publish online, and then Office Delve that draws data from Microsoft Graph and Yammer and Exchange and so forth to form a kind of interface for you to find data, and Power BI that gives you data visualization capabilities. So oftentimes people who want to move to the cloud, they realize that Office 365 is more or less like this, and this is probably what they should secure. They should understand the security implications. So all of these services have their specific security settings. Some have a bit more, like Skype for Business with the external federation, and some might have a little bit less, like Planner, for example. When we expand the view a bit and add the additional services, we've got on the far left, we've got Wunderlist that Microsoft bought a couple of years ago. Then we have Microsoft To Do that was released last week. It's still in preview, and in the future it will replace Wunderlist as well. And then in the middle, we have the extension points, extension capabilities, Power Apps and Flow. With Power Apps, we can build mobile applications that also run on a native desktop and a web browser. And with Flow, we can trigger different kind of workflows that act on behalf of us. And then in the center, Dynamics 365's CRM. And then in the middle, we have security and compliance. So today, if you go to Office 365 and you click the app launcher menu on the top left, you will have security and compliance as a separate icon in there, even though it's more or less a landing page with all or most of the Office 365 security capabilities. So let's expand this a bit further with things we get from Azure. So now on the center at 12 o'clock, we have Azure AD, which is really the core for all of these services because it provides the identities. And since identities is the core really for any cloud service, this also provides the core security features for all of these services. Then on the right, we have Microsoft Stream, which might be, or it seems to be, the future of Office 365 video. So it's a separate streaming platform that is not that strongly tied with SharePoint Online. Then we have MFA, one of my favorites, multi-factor authentication engine that Office 365 uses, but you can also use it without Office 365. Intune for mobile device management, and OMS operations management suite, which is a hybrid tool in that sense that it also works with the on-prem data centers as well as for managing and monitoring Office 365 and Azure. So the idea with this is that you understand the amount of services one can deploy from Office 365, and this is really only a small subset of services you get in Azure, but these are the relevant ones for us today. So in order to understand the security offerings, this is a nice and not too busy slide from Microsoft on the cybersecurity reference. And if we start from the right-hand side, we have Office 365 ASM. Let me get my mouse here. You should be seeing my drawings now. So ASM, Advanced Security Management. That is one of the security offerings in Office 365 that allows us to understand how our Office 365 tenant security settings are, and if there's something we should be worried about. I will be showing this later today. Then we have something called the Cloud App Security. And this is a funny guy in that sense that it actually communicates with ASM. So Advanced Security Management provides you with a nice IT Pro style interface. And then Cloud App Security is hosted in Azure. So you can also access the same capabilities through Azure through a slightly different interface as well. So I mentioned before that identity and access, this guy here in purple, this is the core that we need to secure because it ties everything together. It ties the on-prem, if you choose to go with an on-prem installation that connects with Azure and Office 365 in a sort of hybrid deployment. It ties that together with Office 365 and Azure Active Directory. And just in case you're not familiar, ATA in here, this guy, this is advanced threat analytics that actually runs in on-prem, even though here it's written as if it kind of runs in the cloud. So the last big piece in here is Azure Security Center, which nowadays is built in and available for all Azure subscriptions in a free edition, but you can also get the paid version with a little bit more functionality and features. So for this session, we'll be concentrating more on the right-hand side of features, although I will also show you ATA, how it fits into this big picture. So some of you might be thinking that, do I have to manage all of this and all of the stuff I have in on-prem too? Because I thought that when I deploy stuff in the cloud, I wouldn't have to worry about everything myself anymore. I could just offload some of the worrying and some of the security related tasks to somebody else. And that is true. So the things you need to do is you need to figure out which services from all of the security offerings you plan on using. Then you need to configure and deploy those. Some of those might have an agent that you need to deploy on a set of workstations or virtual machines or different virtualization hosts. And some of those just require you to grant a permission to do something. And from there on, you need to react. You get daily or weekly or monthly reports or reports in real time when something is happening that you should probably be doing something. And that's the essence of it. So the long-term investment in time is more about reacting to reports than going through log files and figuring out if there's something I need to do. So the starting point for an awful lot of companies is that they start with on-prem. This would be the on-premises on the left-hand side. They might have an Active Directory. They might have federation, so they would federate the domain and identities through ADFS, AD Federation Services. And then they would need to have the identities in the cloud as well. And this is typically done with Azure AD Connect, which is a small tool that replicates your on-premises identities to Azure Active Directory. And from there, we can use single sign-on or same sign-on against Office 365. So this is the super simplified image on, we want to go to the cloud, what do we need? This is the minimum effort. Even though you don't have to do this, but this is typically how companies choose to start, because the benefit in here is that you can hold on to your identities in the on-premises AD. You don't have to let go of those. You can and move everything to Azure AD, which is fine as well. But many companies are not simply ready, or they simply cannot let go of AD in on-premises. So once you have this set up, everything should be okay. but we're not really getting any benefits from the monthly licenses we're paying in Office 365 in terms of security, and we are not really securing anything beyond having the basic security investments in Azure AD. So let's start by having a look at the heart of security. And this is Azure Active Directory, AAD. And this is the service responsible for holding all of your identities, your users, your groups, your external users, if you choose to create identities for them or if you choose to federate them somehow. And typically you have at least one Azure AD directory per Azure subscription. You could also share those, so you would have multiple Azure AD tenants, but you would still only have one Azure subscription. And nowadays you can manage this through Azure Portal, since we do have the Azure AD Management Blade available in the Azure Portal. But for a few certain things like multi-factor authentication provisioning, which you typically do once, that you still have to do through the management portal, which is the classic old Azure portal. So my guidance here is that it's important to understand the difference between Azure AD, the on-premises AD, and how Azure AD Connect fits in here. And I'm also mentioning AADDS, which is the Azure Active Directory Domain Services, a set of virtualized domain controllers that run without VMs that you manage, but provide the domain controller capabilities in the cloud, typically for virtual machines, because virtual machines that you host in Azure cannot be members of Azure Active Directory because it doesn't have a concept of a computer account. So your mission really, in the end, is to protect the identities. In the old days, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the mission was to create some sort of perimeter network, be it a DMZ or how you might call it, and put everything in there that you still wanted to secure but manage yourself, but not have that as part of your internal network. So you would have your internal network, your local area network, then you would have your DMZ for extranets and services that external people would access. And then you would have the bad intranet with all the bad practices. Today, companies typically have the internal network, and then the DMZ for them is whatever they choose to run in Office 365 and or Microsoft Azure. And the identities in Azure Active Directory that you typically copy or mirror from your on-prem AD, those identities are now the features you need to secure. Those identities are the most sacred assets you have that you have to make future-proof and secure-proof, so that anybody cannot simply get the password and start doing stuff in your network, since you're not really checking the firewall traffic nowadays based on a port number. You're more interested in if something happens that typically doesn't happen in a given user's account. Azure Active Directory is available in a free version. So whenever you deploy Office 365, even if you deploy that with a single mailbox and no additional services, it means you have Azure AD provisioned in the backend in the free edition. Then you also have basic and premium. Premium nowadays is available in 2 different editions, Premium P1 and Premium P2. It's perfectly fine to go with AAD free. You still get single sign-on. That's often what companies really need as the first step when moving to the cloud. You also get self-service password reset, but that only works for cloud users. So only for those users that are initially created in Azure Active Directory, not for those users that were created in on-premises AD and synchronized to Azure AD. AAD Basic gives you mostly the same capabilities with this subset of features, But then with AAD Premium P1 and P2, you actually start getting the benefits and the additional features. So for security reports, you get advanced reports, meaning you get a lot of email-based reporting that you can act upon. Then you get self-service password reset, so users can reset their on-premises password if they forget about it, or if they just need to change the password every 2 weeks or every 2 months. Then you get multi-factor authentication, and the benefit of MFA in the premium version is that you can also white space predefined IP address ranges. So you can define that MFA multi-factor authentication will not happen if the employee is accessing our resources in Office 365 through the Office network. But if they're at home or traveling, then we can automatically have MFA happen. Azure AD Connect Health, that I'll talk a bit more in a second, also available only in premium, which is a bit sad because it's highly useful. And then Cloud App Discovery that I briefly mentioned, that together with Advanced Security Management, only available in P1 and P2, and PIM Privileged Identity Management only available in P2. And I would say PIM is almost a reason enough to upgrade users to P2 if you're already on P1. And then identity protection in P2. And I did update the prices last night, so I'm hoping, since things change constantly today in the cloud, I'm hoping the prices are more or less the same. This is the Western Europe pricing. So you can see that AAD free, yeah, it's free. AAD basic, less than €1 per user per month. P1 about €5, and P2 about €7.6 per user per month. So definitely not free, and depending if you only use one feature here, they might feel a bit expensive. If you choose to go with either premium one, definitely deploy as much as you can out of the features that you're paying for. So I've struggled a bit in understanding what the security building blocks are in Azure. What do I get and what can I deploy? And this is the list of all the features that relate to security in Azure, but not the list of features you get in Office 365. I have those later. So without going through all of these, because we could probably spend a couple of hours just talking about this slide, I'm highlighting a few guys from here, and for that, I'm first highlighting the site-to-site VPN that was briefly shown in the initial picture, that when companies go to cloud, they have on-prem, then they have the cloud. They typically set up a VPN between that. Larger companies might go with an express route. Nowadays, you need one for Azure, and then you need one for Office 365. The reason to go with express route would be that you get some sort of service level agreement, some sort of reliability on the connectivity between your network and Azure or Office 365. Then when you start securing things, Security Center, of course, already there. And in addition, Cloud App Discovery in here provides cloud-based application discovery from your end users' laptops and workstations. So it's a way of figuring who's using what that we're not really managing. Do we have some sort of shadow IT in place that people just decide that let's not use OneDrive for business, let's use Dropbox, and they move all of their files to Dropbox without IT really sanctioning that and without having a multi-factor authentication or single sign-on in place. And then for Azure AD, I went through just on a topical level most of these, but I will highlight OMS Security and Audit. So OMS, Operations Management Suite, has a separate module called Security and Audit that you can get even in the free version. And I will demo that along with the other core features here on what you can do with OMS. And I always feel that OMS is the #1 service every company should deploy once they have Azure AD deployed and single sign-on is up and running. Then go to OMS because it's fairly trivial to do the basic configuration. So Azure Security Center gives you a central overview of all of your Azure resources. Depending on how you are used to managing your Azure subscriptions, I'm seeing Azure subscriptions with really strict, almost army-like planning for all the resource groups. Where do we deploy web apps? Where do we deploy virtual machines? And they benefit from Azure Security Center in that way that they get a nice reporting that everything is as it should. Then I'm seeing probably a bit more companies deploying Azure, just clicking stuff up and running when they need it, forgetting about it, and then later on they try doing an inventory. That what did we actually have running here? We had a virtual machine, we have some databases. What's the security on all of this? So Azure Security Center gives you a quick overview for virtual machines, networking, SQL databases, and storage. And if there's anything you should do, it gives you a quick link. For example, in this screenshot, I have 9 high or critical recommendations and 4 medium ones. And when I click those, it gives me a detailed list that you should deploy stuff. So here's a good example. The 4th one in here, there's a task for me in one of my virtual machines that I need to provision the next generation firewall because this virtual machine is not running any separate firewall. It's just running the Windows default firewall and an Azure network security group that basically denies connectivity from the external networks, including the public internet. But since I don't have a real firewall, Azure Security Center is complaining that this is really something you should fix. And if I click that one, it gives me the options that the partners that can provide me with a firewall solution that will be hosted in Azure. So Azure Security Center built in, available now in the free edition. The other thing that I find highly useful for figuring out what's happening is Azure Monitor. And this has been available for a couple of months now. And it gives you an X-ray view on everything that happens in your Azure subscription or subscriptions if you have multiple. So you can select one or more subscriptions. Where's my mouse? Oh, there. You can select one or more subscriptions and select one or more resource groups and say, give me a report for last month for anything that happened in any of these assets. Did I have any problems? Did I have anything to do with security that I should fix? So in a sense, this gives you the same output as Azure Security Center, but this also goes to everything in Azure, while Azure Security Center more or less goes to virtual machines, databases, and storage. And the great thing in here is that you can export the data to Power BI. So if you want to have an almost real-time dashboard showing you a task list of stuff that you should probably be working on, Power BI can give you a nice report on that. So that's really the core basics in understanding the general layout of the security offerings. And next, for the next 20 minutes or so, I'll walk you through the real security tooling that you will then put on top of these. And I'm quite certain that I will have time for a real demo as well. So Secure Score on Office 365 is the thing you should continue to next. So after having Azure AD up and running, after deploying OMS, Operations Management Suite, move on to Secure Score. Just go to securescore.office.com. And when you authenticate, it scans through your Office 365 subscription settings and the security settings you have in place. and it gives you a nice score, meaning that the maximum is 344 today, and your subscription got something else. Here's one subscription that got 71. Initially, I felt that this is probably a fairly low score. I should get at least 300 because there's much more room to make it better. But on average, Office 365 tenants get 29. So considering it's way beyond 29, 71 starts to sound fairly good in that sense. So when you run this, it gives you a list of stuff that if you want to get 100 points as the score, do this. And it gives you a ready-made list. And it's not about buying new licenses. It's more about, oh, I can see that you have 5 global admins in your Office 365 subscription, and they don't have MFA enabled. Click here to force enable multi-factor authentication for these admins. If you do this, it's worth 5 points. So when you enable that, then you would get 76 as the score, or 77, or whatever the amount of points would be. So this is an action list for things to fix, but I always urge my customers that be reasonable. There's no reason to go to 344 if it effectively locks everything down and nobody can really do anything anymore because you keep getting MFA prompts, or it enforces you to do password resets every 2 hours. It's not productive anymore. So find a balance between the average 29 and the maximum 344. I don't think I've ever found a production Office 365 subscription with 344 as the score. If you happen to achieve that, let me know on Twitter. I'd be happy to see what you did. The next thing in securing Azure, as I said, Azure identities, Azure AD identities, that's the first and the biggest and most important thing to secure, is Azure AD Connect Health. And sadly, as I mentioned before, this is only available in Azure AD Premium, so P1 or P2. Thus, you would need a license to get this up and running. It's not available as a free. But this is available as a trial. So you can enable the trial. I think it's 30 days or 60 days that you can run it in a trial mode to get the look and feel if this would be beneficial for you. So the purpose of AAD Connect Health is that it will give you an agent, a small exe file. You need to install that on all of your AD core servers, domain controllers, ADFS proxies, AAD Connect server or servers if you have multiple, AD Federation services. So drop the agent on all of the services that somehow take part in your AD and identity infrastructure. Upon installation, it will prompt you for the global admin permissions, do an authentication. It configures everything automatically after that one. And you will start seeing statistics in a few minutes after the initial installation. And the things you get with AAD Connect Health is that it will let you know if AAD Connect synchronization fails or if it's experiencing problems. It will also say if there's a problem with your on-premises AD. Let's say that in on-prem AD, you have the so-called FSMO roles, those specific roles that are locked on the individual domain controllers. If one of those roles becomes missing, domain controller goes offline, and that might affect how other things will work in on-prem and in the cloud. AAD Connect Health will also give you a warning on that one. And if ADFS SSL certificates are about to expire, it will also tell you about that. So it's enough to install. You don't really need to configure anything. You will get automated alerts if something fails. Azure AD Identity Protection, also part of AAD Premium, P1 and P2, not available in the basic license. And this monitors for risk events or any kind of known vulnerabilities in your user identities. So in the screenshot on the right-hand side, you can see that I've got 11 users out of 338 users are at risk, but 8 users are secured. So the 8 users are users that I've enforced MFA. And the others are users that do not have MFA enforced, and they've done something in the past that triggered a risk factor. Some of those events would be that they would log in to Exchange Online to read their emails using their Azure AD credentials. Everything would go well, but they would be traveling and they would be logging from a public coffee shop, and the IP address would look a bit suspicious. Maybe the ISP the coffee shop is using has had some sort of security issues in the past, so it's flagged as a risk that the user is logging to a network that might not be trustworthy anymore. So instead of just looking at this, you can configure actions based on the risk factor. So the risk factors are low, medium, and high. So you can enforce that if we have a risk of a medium, we can enforce password reset, which subsequently enforces MFA. And if it's high, we can lock the account or enforce MFA or enforce password reset, enforce MFA, and even still we could do something like send an email to somebody to react to this. And this will also send you a weekly digest of any findings that it found. PIM, Privileged Identity Management, is one of the greatest features in the Azure AD premium licenses, but since it requires the premium license, I'm not seeing this widely used yet, which is a bit sad. The purpose of PIM is to get rid of fixed static admin roles. The idea is that instead of granting users admin roles like a global admin or a SharePoint admin or security admin, all users are normal users. And when they need to do administrative tasks like provision a site collection in SharePoint Online, they will ask for the permission. I would need to become a SharePoint service admin. And we can define how long the role will be active, so it becomes non-permanent. The duration can be anything from 1 hour to 72 hours. And while you have the admin role, we can also enforce MFA. So as a normal user, I cannot provision a site collection in SharePoint Online, or I cannot create a new mailbox in Exchange Online, but I come to PIM, I request that I would like to get the role of global admin or SharePoint admin or Exchange admin, and there's a predefined time. It would be 8 hours that it's available for me. Once I get it, it enforces MFA. So when I open a new browser session and I log in to SharePoint Online Admin Center, it enforces MFA first, but then I do have the admin permissions after that. And after 8 hours, the admin token, the admin privilege is automatically removed from my account. So you can see in this example, I've got 17 users in admin roles, and it's too much. So it's complaining a bit on that you should have less static roles, are more non-permanent, more people who can request that, and you can also tie a workflow in the request. So if somebody is asking something, you can trigger a workflow that does stuff before the user automatically gets the admin access. OMS that I've mentioned briefly 2 times. If you're familiar with System Center Operations Manager, which is an on-prem server software, mainly for managing your local on-prem, OMS is kind of like the sister offering in Azure. And sometimes in Azure, Azure talks about log analytics, which is more or less the same thing, but OMS has quite a bit more as well. So OMS works so that it gives you an agent that you drop on all of your VMs, all of your Hyper-V hosts, all of your VMware hosts, all of your physical boxes. So not just domain controllers or SQL servers, all of the servers. Then you also grant permission to Office 365 so that OMS can audit what's happening in Office 365. And then you will start getting guidance, estimations. Oh, it seems that your virtual host is running out of memory next week because we see you keep on adding VMs and people keep on using them. But this will also have a separate security, and audit module. In OMS, you need to enable the modules by hand. There's about 20 to 25 modules today. And when you enable those, they start gathering data from the VMs, from the services, and you start getting a list of stuff you can work on. And everything you have in here, you can trigger a webhook to an external system to act upon, or you can do real-time reporting in Power BI. I'll show this in a bit, so you'll know what's happening. MFA, multi-factor authentication, I think I've covered all of this, but just important for you to know that you have Office 365 MFA, you have Azure MFA for admins, and then you have Azure MFA. So the difference between these is that Azure MFA allows you to set the whitelistings and custom voice messages and all kinds of nifty features. And Office 365 MFA more or less just gives you the MFA for end users. There's also an option for having Azure MFA server running in a virtual machine in on-prem, so that if you have a VPN endpoint, and when people open the VPN connection to get to on-prem securely, you can enforce MFA for that as well. And that works quite nicely. Cloud App Discovery discovers the shadow IT solutions. So in this example, you can see that I've got Dropbox for Business. It's in managed state, meaning that we enforce single sign-on. But then we have something called OLARC or Discus that are collaboration and productivity tools, and they're unmanaged. And one user is using those, but we have no idea what he's doing in there. So Cloud App Discovery, you drop an agent to all workstations, laptops and desktops, and it starts auditing the HTTP and HTTPS traffic going out from those workstations to select addresses, including these services. You can drop the agent with a consent dialog. The user gets a consent. Would you like to consent to this? That we're essentially getting a lot of your traffic. Or you can just hide the consent and smoothly install the executable, and nobody's the wiser. But probably check with your legal department what you can do with that. ASM, part of Office 365, the sibling offering to Cloud App Discovery. This gives you, it has a few different ways of working. It triggers based on anomalies. So in the list, you can see there's an impossible travel activity on the first item. The user who triggered this is actually my sister. She moved to the Netherlands a couple of years ago. So she's hopping between Finnish and Dutch IP networks constantly. So that's why it's complaining about impossible travel activity. She first opens email from the Netherlands, then she opens VPN to Helsinki, refreshes the email view, and thus we have impossible travel activity. There's a nice feature in ASM that it can also capture your on-premises edge router logs. So let's say you have an F5 device or a Cisco device. You can dump those logs to ASM to figure out what's happening, what's going out from our network to anywhere, not just Office 365. Threat intelligence, this is the newest offering in Office 365, and it gives you reports on incoming email, outgoing email, and also typical usage in Office 365, and it lets you know what kind of threats were detected and which of those were stopped and which of those were simply removed. So the screenshots you see in here are from my own tenant. And for this week, it has scanned about 7,400 emails. And out of those, over 1,000 emails have been delivered to junk directly. And one malware, a JavaScript malware, was captured and not delivered at all. So threat intelligence part of Office 365 nowadays. ATA, I did briefly mention this one as well. ATA is an on-premises tool that you need to install in a VM, and then you need to install a gateway component. It captures in your local network, it captures all the traffic to and from your on-premises Active Directory domain controllers. So all the authentication traffic that happens, it authenticates and captures that and tries to figure out, is there something we should be worried about? In the screenshot, you can see that I've got a user, this guy here. He had a connection to our direct access IPv6 tunnel, and from there, he was talking to our local AD and trying to list all the users. And it spotted this because it figures that, okay, this guy is doing a query against AD. We should be worried about this. It won't block it, but it will give you visibility that this is something that is happening. So definitely, if you have a chance, do deploy ATA because it gives you visibility to your internal network. What's happening in terms of security? It's fully automatic. You install, there's nothing you can do. It does everything automatically, a bit like SharePoint. So let's have a quick demo. I would love to spend 2 hours on the demo, but I do realize that we don't have that kind of time. So what I'll do is I'll start with Azure. This is one of my Azure subscriptions. The interesting thing that I'll start in here is the Security Center. So I will open this one, and you can see the values in here that I've got 8 recommendations. So let's have a look if there's something I can do about this. And keep in mind, this is more or less for the VM and networking and whatnot. And in here, once again, it's telling me I need to deploy the next generation firewall for these 2 VMs. Luckily, I'm not using either of these anymore, but I could say, yeah, let's install it on this one. Which ones do you have? And it simply says you can go with a Barracuda, Checkpoint, Cisco, or Fortinet. And these are essentially bring your own license or pay-as-you-go licenses. I can see that Barracuda and Cisco is bring your own license, and Checkpoint and Fortinet are possibly pay-as-you-go licenses per minute or per hour. The other thing that I wanted to show you is OMS, because it has a lot of moving parts. So it has its own separate interface, and the initial view that you'll get in OMS gives you this big picture of your data center. So this includes my on-prem investments, Azure investments, and Office 365 investments. You can see all kinds of great stuff in here. In AD assessment, it's telling me that availability is great, everything is running well. In on-prem, performance is great, upgrade is great, but I'm missing a few updates from domain controllers. I should fix these. I could earn 15.6 points. And if I'm not sure what to do, it says DC2 does not have this and this. Here's a link that will take your hand and guide you through the whole process on how to do it. So security in here, it's a separate module. And when I click security, you can see an awful lot of information. And I see I'm missing a couple of critical updates. And the security records are from my virtual machines. So this is the Windows security logs in here. 20,000, 22,000 security records coming in, which is nice. But the thing I'm now interested in is threat intelligence in here. So I've got a bunch of countries with random webcams, fridges, laptops with malware trying to attack my network. My services in Azure, my services in Office 365, or my services in on-prem. So I'm interested in Europe. The Dutch people are up to something again. And I can see from here that somebody with a client IP of this did do an HTTP GET to my direct access virtual machine. They did get 200. They were loading the front page. It's kind of okay, but not really no. So let's see what they were trying to do. It's a botnet. So Microsoft already recognized it's a botnet. So what I can do is I can pick up the coordinates from there and open my favorite mapping solution, which would probably be maps.google.com. And I'll just put the coordinates in here and see if we can find the location, and we can. And let's see if they have Street View. So this is from somewhere in the Netherlands near the Hague, I think. So let's zoom in a bit closer. It looks a bit shady, so it might be that somebody was using a laptop in here with an open firewall, unpatched Windows XP, for example. And with the client IP this guy had, who's living in this building and this apartment, it tried to scan through my network. Not much I can do about it anymore, but at least I'm fairly certain that I can react to this now if I need to. And lastly, a quick peek at ATA before going through a few more things and wrapping up. This is the view on ATA. You can see that there's one virtual machine that broke the trust between the AD. This is the guy trying to scan through my AD. Do I need to react to that one? Another broken trust. Somebody did a DNS query, tried to go through my whole DNS to see, is this okay? No, it's not okay. Let's save this. So I keep on getting the alerts in the future as well. Okay, so I know there's a lot of moving parts in there and I don't have time to show everything, but for now, those are the critical pieces in there. A couple of more things. I'm not a huge fan of talking about licenses, but I often get questions on those. So I found this picture from Microsoft that nicely gives you the big picture. EMS Enterprise Mobility plus Security Licensing, EMS E3 gives you AAD Premium P1 as well as ATA license. EMS E5 gives you P2 as well as Cloud App Security. So in that sense, EMS E5 gives you the best of both worlds in Office 365 and Azure, and EMS E3 gives you quite a lot, but not some of the features you get in the cloud. So once you enable this, you start getting emails. Here's one email that I'm missing as security updates in one of my internal SQL servers. Somebody was using PIM, so somebody was asking to become a SharePoint service admin. It was granted, but I still get a report that this happened. This is the weekly status, how many applications users are using in the cloud, any problematic logins, any password resets happening, any other problems I should react to. This you get on a weekly basis. This is a bit problematic. Replication is broken, but there's a green icon. So it should be red. But if you look at it closely, replication is broken, but it was resolved, which means we give you a green icon. So just make sure you understand what the point is here. Another one that there's one vulnerability found. This is from yesterday. I was fiddling around with some of the tools. I did something too much. I got an alert for myself for the stuff that I did, just in case there's something shady. So there's a lot of content, a lot of stuff to worry about in terms of security. These 3 links help you the most. Patterns and practices, free guidance. That's the first link. Then there's a book on Kindle as well as a paper-based version, the Azure Security book from Microsoft guys. And there's a free ebook, the Perimeter book, that gives you the rest. And last but not least, do deploy Azure AD reporting. So go to the settings and enable the reports. Do deploy OMS and do have a look at Azure Security Center. That's the minimum you can do, and it won't cost you any extra if you go with the free licenses. Alrighty, I am right on time, I hope, yes. Any questions?
Perfect, thank you very much, Jussi. Yeah, we have a couple of questions, about 10 or 12, so I would just go through them. We have about 5 minutes left. Maybe we can extend it by another 5 so that we can get all questions answered live. So let's start with the first one from Prashant. Question is, can you please explain the messaging mechanism among AAD, ADFS, and AAD Connect?
Yes, I can, because we can probably spend about 6 hours going through that now. But in high level, the mechanism is that AAD Connect talks with your local AD domain controller using the typical AD ports that you have, and then it talks with HTTPS against Azure AD. The challenge today that we have with AAD Connect is that it requires quite a bit of IP addresses open on the outbound firewall. And some customers have a problem with that if they cannot allow based on a DNS name.
Okay, thank you. Then another question by Daniel. Is there a minimum security score all tenants should be hitting, and this broken down to specify actions? Could we map these to a recognized accreditation such as a Cyber Essentials Plus?
I can't recall by heart if there's a minimum one, but if the average is 29, so the minimum is probably 1. When you initially deploy Office 365, your score is probably closer to 0 if you don't have anything running. Then when you start enabling features, your score might go up if you follow the guidance. So what I do with my customers is that whenever I visit the customer for the first time, I run the secure score and see what's the starting point and what should be the target point. There's a small tool in secure score that you can crank the slider closer to 344, and it will simply give you a list that this is the actions that you need to do. And then I can have a talk with the customer that, okay, if you want to achieve maximum security, it will mean this, and this translates to 15 days of work. Is it fine?
Thank you. So another question from Sauli. Since Cloud App Security needs client installation on the monitored endpoints, not all companies want to deploy it. How do you see what is the relationship between Cloud App Discovery versus Cloud App Security?
Yeah, I agree. The agent is a bit challenging sometimes, but then again, companies who want to pay for the license, they do realize that they probably have an infrastructure for deploying the agents. So they'll simply drop the agent and that's it. But for companies who do not want to deploy that one, I recommend going with advanced security management on the Office 365 side, which uses the same infrastructure, because it won't have a separate agent, but then you can simply offload the edge network router logs, upload those to ASM, and as long as the users are accessing any of the external cloud-based services from the Office network, then we get the same data, and ASM will give you the same kind of results.
Okay, thank you. So Christoph is asking, is there a kind of organizational best practice about how to manage all those tools in corporate environment? You cannot rely on having 1 to 2 people clicking around all week.
I do agree. The best practice is in the Microsoft book. So just 2 slides back, the book that the picture is over there, that does have the guidance. At minimum, do this once, and then you will be in there. Discussions with organizations who have a security organization in place, they typically have requirements. And then it's about mapping those to the available features. What should we deploy? And it's not about clicking for 2 weeks here and there. It's about doing a security deployment project. This is what we'll deploy. Then we'll follow up with the reports that we're getting, like any security deployment for anything else.
Okay, thank you. Somebody asks, MFA for admin, is it possible if you want to use PowerShell for administration?
For enabling MFA admin, yes, it's possible, but for anything to do with managing the MFA, my recollection is that it's still on the old portal, so it won't have the PowerShell commandlets. And in a way, it makes sense because you provision MFA once, then you configure it once. So PowerShell typically gives little benefit that you do the same stuff once, but the scripting or automation doesn't give you much benefit.
Okay, thank you. So we have a couple of more, 3 more. I think we'll just do all of them, despite we are almost running out of time.
Yep.
Dean is asking, will any of those tools provide any insight into the use of connectors in Teams, Flow, Power Apps, and/or Outlook?
Great question. Next question. For the connectors, he's probably meaning stuff like, I have a group and I will create a custom connector to connect with Trello to get stuff for me. And as long as any of the connectors need authentication tokens, that will leave a trail in Azure AD. So OMS is capable of picking that together with external access, but they don't specifically have a view for stuff like this connector went there and got this data. And for that, you can use the audit logs. It's part of the security and compliance view. There's a separate audit logs, and I think that should be the place to look into.
Right, we have 2 more. Asad is asking, he has a TFS server with single user, a test TFS server in his own ID, and a personal MSDN subscription with Azure that is linked with his personal email address. So his question is that how could he integrate this with 2 ADs so that it will bring up TFS to TFS Online? Hope you could understand that.
I kind of, so you have an on-prem TFS and you want to talk with VST as Visual Studio Team System. And Visual Studio Team System is linked to one Azure AD for single sign-on. So your on-prem TFS belongs to one AD, you synchronize those identities to Azure AD, provision VSTS against that Azure AD, meaning that then the TFS and VSTS are talking together as needed, using the same identities. But if you want to have multiple Azure ADs, then you either need to have multiple VSTSs or invite external users to the VSTS.
Okay, perfect. So the final question is, where can I get the cybersecurity diagram that you've shown?
I think we're sharing the materials.
Yes.
So definitely true there, but I've seen Microsoft publicly sharing that one, and that's the reason I am using it occasionally, because it's such a good slide, and Microsoft is in my understanding, Microsoft is happy that people actually see the whole offerings.
Great. So that's it. Thank you very much, Jussi, for your time and for this great presentation. We got already some excellent feedback. If you could just move on 1 slide. So for everyone who is still here, just a quick announcement. The next webinar by Rancor will be with the one and only Spencer Harbour. Probably everybody who has been in SharePoint for a while knows Spence. He's also an MVP, MCSM. Actually, he's also a certified architect. I forgot that here. And he will talk about user profile synchronization with Identity Manager in SharePoint Server 2016. So if you go into our website, rancor.com/media/webinar, then you will find the webinar registration for this webinar on the 17th of May. So with that, I thank you all for holding out 3 more minutes over time, and very much I'm thanking Jussi for this nice webinar.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for attending. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to ping me on Twitter or contact Matthias or myself through other media.
Okay, just somebody says he cannot see the webinar. If you can just refresh, it might be that there was some caching going on. So, but it should be available now on the website. Thank you very much and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.